The Cowboys and Eagles, Monday night at 9, only on Channel 6.
It goes to the heart of what George Bush knew and when he knew it in the Arms for Hostages scandal. A top-secret meeting in 1986 in Jerusalem, and only 3 men could say what transpired. One was George Bush, another his top aide, Craig Fuller, and the third, a top Israeli official, who 2 years later would die in a plane crash. Until now, the only record of that meeting was Fuller's notes. But ABC News has obtained another account, the classified notes taken by the third man, Amiram Nir. Tonight, an ABC News exclusive and a Nightline investigation. Arms for Hostages. The third man speaks.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
It must be galling to President Bush to be confronted again and again with suggestions that he has not been entirely truthful about his own knowledge of and participation in the arms for hostage deals that transpired between Iran and the United States in 1985 and 86. But what happens in a presidential campaign is that issues which have lain dormant for a while suddenly receive new and widespread attention, which in itself then produces previously unavailable information and documents. Such material recently came into the hands of our editorial producer, Tara Sonnenschein. Put together with everything else we've learned on this subject over the past year, it makes a pretty compelling case that George Bush knew a good deal more about arms for hostages than he has ever acknowledged publicly. But you'll judge for yourselves. July 1986. Vice President George Bush was on an official visit to Israel. Cameras recorded the public events. The published schedule recorded official events, as when Bush met with Prime Minister Shimon Peres. But not even the U.S. Secret Service knew the identity of the Israeli official who met with the Vice President in his suite at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem from 7:35 to 8:05 on the morning of July 29th. There were only 3 people present: George Bush, his Chief of Staff, Craig Fuller, who took detailed notes of what transpired, and the Israeli, Amiram Nir, a special advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister on anti-terrorism. What was discussed at that meeting would never have become public knowledge except that 4 months later, the Iran-Contra scandal broke. And shortly after that, a special commission under the chairmanship of Senator John Tower of Texas was set up to investigate the scandal. Eventually, Craig Fuller's MEMCON, or Memorandum of Conversation, would be released, but not right away. Before those notes were released, Vice President Bush was interviewed by a staff member of the Tower Commission, who recorded that conversation as follows. Vice President Bush related that his discussion with Mr. Nir was generally about counterterrorism. There was no discussion of specifics relating to arms going to the Iranians. A short time later, after the existence of the Fuller memo became known, White House spokesman Larry Speakes acknowledged that the MEMCON should have been handed over. Soon after, the memo was leaked to the Washington Post. So that a year later, when George Bush started his '88 campaign for president, he would be asked about that secret meeting with Amiram Nir.
The way I remember that one is I was presented with a tiny piece of a very complicated puzzle.
Until now, then, we have seen Craig Fuller's memo and have heard his account of what happened.
I actually think that meeting wasn't terribly significant. It was an effort to demonstrate that they could get their intelligence official to sit down and talk with us. And that report, the minutes, I think, as you know, go 3 or 4 pages, was all over the board in terms of what the effort really involved.
George Bush has been interviewed on the meeting, and his recollections are a part of the record.
I was asked to see Nir. I didn't know the man. I was told that the Prime Minister of Israel wanted me to see Mr. Nir.
He knew who Nir was.
Howard Teicher was a member of the National Security Staff. He and another NSC staffer, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, had briefed the vice president just before his trip to Israel.
We met with the vice president. It was Ollie's suggestion that we brief him. We wanted to make sure, because of our concern about leaks, that the vice president, who was knowledgeable about the Iran initiative and about Israel's role in the Iran initiative, not discuss anything with anyone who was not in the loop. So we talked with him, among other things, about who he could speak with. And Nir was explicitly mentioned as one of those individuals with whom the subject could be discussed.
Nir, after all, had been right in the middle of the arms for hostages negotiations in Tehran just 2 months earlier. Remember that story when it broke? The mission that carried a matched set of pistols and the chocolate cake decorated with a key? The mission that was headed by former National Security Advisor Bud McFarlane. Ollie North was along, so was Howard Teicher, and so too was Amiram Nir. About a year ago, we played you some tapes that Nightline obtained of North and Nir negotiating with the Iranians.
And based on our discussions in Frankfurt, that if your government can cause the humanitarian release of the Americans held in Beirut 10 hours immediately after they are released, the airplane will land with the remaining missile parts.
We were asked to show our confidence by supplying 500 toes in December, then 500 toes in February, then 500 more toes in the end of February.
So Amiram Nir was undeniably a player, but one whose own version of his meeting with Vice President Bush has never been heard. Nir died in a plane crash in late 1988. What has never been publicly known until tonight is that he did address in some detail his conversation with George Bush. When the Fuller memorandum was leaked to the Washington Post, Nir wrote his own top-secret memo to the Prime Minister of Israel. It is so detailed that we are all but forced to conclude that Nir was working from a tape of the conversation. Here's how the memo began. He is referring, remember, to Fuller's account of his meeting with Vice President Bush. Quote, "In the report, as it was written, there are many mistakes, few of them essential, resulting from the recording of the conversation by a person who was not familiar with the operation up to that meeting, Craig Fuller, and is not particularly knowledgeable about Middle Eastern issues." A little snippy, perhaps? Too dismissive of the Vice President's Chief of Staff? Here's an excerpt from Fuller's own deposition before the Iran-Contra Select Committee. Quote, "On July 28th, Colonel North phoned me and indicated on a secure telephone that he would like for the VP to meet with Mr. Nir. He indicated that I may not know a lot about the program, but that the Vice President was fully aware of it and asked for a half hour or so for Nir to come in." Why was Ollie North so eager to have Vice President Bush briefed by Amiram Nir? When we come back, what may be the most fascinating revelation of all in a still classified chronology prepared by Nir for the Israeli Prime Minister.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Ford and your Ford dealer.
No one has to tell you that doing business today is more challenging than ever. But all over the world, one company is helping you meet those challenges head on, no matter what it takes. New challenges, new thinking.
Where you find the name Sears, you find names that are a promise. They're names that do what they're supposed to do, what we told you they would do. Craftsman, Kenmore, Die Hard. And the promise is, you can count on me. And those Sears brand names are just 3 of the ways we say it.
Introducing Ford Taurus and the Dummy. Ford has the only cars in this class that offer dual airbags. And to help make sure you won't have to use them, Taurus also offers anti-lock brakes. Ford Taurus.
We have these 12 trucks here. You know there were 12. And one of them...
When I brought my son into the company,
I thought it would be years before I could hand over the reins.
Hey, Jack, I want you to meet my son, Adam.
Hi,
Nice to see you again.
But he's turned out to be a real go-getter. And he's changing everything. From the people we hire to the way we use our storage space. When our health care insurance came up for renewal, I thought, he'll recommend some Johnny-come-lately company. Turns out he decided to keep Independence Blue Cross and Pennsylvania Blue Shield. Said they're changing too, with an all-new range of managed care plans and new ideas for controlling costs. Then he informs me he's sending our managers on some sort of wilderness bonding retreat. Maybe I'm ready to retire after all.
Because today hardly resembles yesterday, there's a whole new blue to carry you through.
I'm David Brinkley. On Sunday, Bush and Clinton started way back in New Hampshire. Now they have to deal with Perot, who came in at the last minute. What kind of campaign will we have now? There is, to this day, no deviation from the official public position that the United States never did, never would trade arms for hostages. Ronald Reagan angrily rejected the notion in November of 1986.
The charge has been made that the United States has shipped weapons to Iran as ransom payment for the release of American hostages in Lebanon, that the United States undercut its allies and secretly violated American policy against trafficking with terrorists. Those charges are utterly false.
On the one hand, George Bush says he never thought this was an arms for hostages deal, right?
Sure, same as the president's position.
Same as the president's position.
Exactly.
But way back in May of 1986, when Bud McFarland, Oliver North, and Howard Teicher returned to Washington after their disastrous mission to Tehran, they spelled out in no uncertain terms, Teicher says, what the negotiations had turned into.
Upon our return, the morning of May 29th, McFarland explicitly briefed the President, the Vice President, and Chief of Staff Don Regan, told them that as far as he was concerned, this was nothing more than arms for hostages, and suggested that the entire initiative be turned off because, in a word, the Iranians were jerking us around.
Remember now, the United States had already authorized several shipments of TOW anti-tank missiles and Hawk missiles that had been shipped to Iran in late 85 and early 86. McFarland left no doubt as to how the Iranians regarded such shipments.
He said, this is arms for hostages. The Iranians want the Hawks, or they're not going to do anything else to get the hostages released. And this whole thing should be stopped.
And so for a couple of months, it was. Until July 26th, when one of the American hostages, Father Lawrence Jenko, was released and flown to Germany. By coincidence, Vice President Bush was also in Germany, taking a one-day rest stopover on his way to Israel. Jenko and Bush spoke by phone, but did not meet. Which brings us to a chronology of events prepared by the Israeli counter-terrorist expert Amiram Nir. The chronology, which Nightline only obtained in the last few days, is still classified. Nir writes of a telephone conversation that he had with Oliver North July 27th or 28th. Quote, North explained that he had intended to meet with VP George Bush in Frankfurt and brief him as to the measures that led to Jenko's release. But because of the Vice President's early departure to Tel Aviv, he could not do it. North asked Nir to brief the VP in his stead, end quote. As we've already told you, Craig Fuller, in his official deposition to the Iran-Contra Select Committee, confirms that on July 28th, Colonel North phoned me and indicated on a secure telephone that he would like for the VP to meet Mr. Nir. Now, back to July of 1986 and the meeting between Amiram Nir and Vice President Bush. Just before that meeting took place, a hostage was released. You remember that?
That's correct, Reverend Jenko.
What was the impact of that release?
Well, that release came at a decisive moment. It came at a time when both sides were arguing whether to proceed with more arms transfers for some hostages, the sequential approach, or to hold out for the total approach. The fact that he was released was a demonstration that the Iranians were still able and willing to deliver, and rekindled exaggerated expectations of what they might be prepared to do in exchange for more arms.
What was really hanging things up between the Iranians and the United States was not the notion of exchanging arms for hostages, but rather Washington's insistence that the deal be done all at once, all the arms for all the hostages. The Iranians didn't like that, and they were sure that once Washington got all its hostages back, they would have lost all their leverage with the United States. That was the thrust of Nir's briefing to Vice President Bush. The release of Lawrence Jenko was a signal from the Iranians. It'll still work. Hostage, weapons. Hostage, weapons. Exactly 1 year ago, I spoke to General Richard Secord about the Nir-Bush briefing and asked him what happened next.
Yeah, well, the policy was changed. But I mean, what I'm getting at, which you obviously know, is do you think that there was a direct relationship between that meeting? In other words, did Vice President Bush play a role?
Oh, I think, yeah, I'm sure he played a role.
Which takes us back to an extended interview that I conducted with then Vice President Bush during the campaign of 1988.
You got to go back to the genesis of this deal. And the genesis was this. You have a very radical Khomeini controlling Iran. We felt, from intelligence and from knowledge of what was going on in the country, other ways, that there might be elements more moderate than Ayatollah Khomeini. So the whole plan started out to be to reach out to moderate elements. And then we reached out to the so-called moderates, and they said to establish bona fides, you know, good faith, you ought to sell under the law a certain amount of arms to us, not to Khomeini, but to these elements in Iran. Then the question arose that if we were willing to do that, they might use their influence with the people that were holding the hostages, not dealing with the hostage holders. And it was that rationale and that the president signed off on in making this deal. Not trading with the hostage holders.
Let me interrupt you for a moment.
With those that were, you know, had influence with the hostage holders.
The moderates.
Now that gets blurred. Yeah, no, the moderates. But that gets blurred because there was a lot of dealing that went on that maybe I didn't know of and the president didn't know of. I know we didn't. But when it came out, it blurred this thing. And it became, in the minds of the public, certainly, arms for hostages.
The question of dealing with the moderates when we come back.
If you've discovered there's more to focus on in life than a standard driver's side airbag, discover all the safety features available in the all-new 1993 Toyota Corolla. And discover Corolla again.
I know a place, a wide open range, where the spirit's free to roam. When Dixie howls away from way up west, when Dixie
Has the simple joy of driving become a casualty of the times? Introducing 200 turbocharged horses, uncanny grace, and one of the safest cars Saab has ever built. The new 9000 CSE, a car you can drive hard with your conscience intact.
See your Saab dealer now for a special introductory offer on the 9000 CSE and CS.
You see, I figured it was another tie. But when I open the box, I see this thing that looks like a baby typewriter. So I ask, what is it? She says it's a Brother P-Touch. She says it's a new electronic labeling system that makes adhesive labels in 5 sizes, 4 styles, and lots of colors. First I labeled file folders, computer disks, my videotapes. You gotta help me with this problem. What problem?
My resorts is really jumping, so I'm going undercover to see if the guests are as excited as I am. May I ask you what you think about resorts?
Wow, there's so much to do here, Merv. I don't know where to start.
Excuse me.
Stop now, Merv. We have dinner, then there's a show.
I'd like to get your honest opinion of resorts.
My honest opinion? Merv, I wouldn't go anywhere else.
You look familiar, darling. Are you new here?
And on Merv, you got to come out to resorts.
Monday, you work hard. Uncle Sam takes a lot. Ever wonder where it goes? You won't believe how some of your taxes are wasted. Like this levy almost nobody wants. We'll show you what else that money could have bought. Your money, your choice. Beginning Monday on ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
When I interviewed Vice President Bush in the summer of 1988, I spent much of the time pressing Mr. Bush on the Iran initiative. Wasn't it clearly arms for hostages? And wasn't the United States dealing beyond any doubt with the most radical elements? It was all there in the Nir briefing, wasn't it?
I didn't know the details of all of this. When he talked in there about radicals and stuff, I didn't know any of the plot.
Even Craig Fuller's memorandum makes it crystal clear what Nir was talking about. Quote, Nir described some of the lessons learned. We are dealing with the most radical elements. They can deliver, that's for sure. They were called yesterday and thanked, and today more phone calls. This is good because we've learned they can deliver and the moderates can't. But when Amiram Nir drafted his own classified memorandum to the Israeli Prime Minister, he felt that Fuller wasn't explicit enough. He wrote, in actuality, it was said, with regard to the hostages, there is no choice but to deal with the most extreme because they are controlling the fate. They are capable of delivering where the moderates are not. Now that Jenko has been released, it is absolutely clear. Amiram Nir, remember, is dead, killed in a plane crash in late 1988. This memorandum of his, of which only 4 copies were made, was drafted for the Israeli Prime Minister and is to this day classified. But Nir summarized Reagan and Bush's problem neatly. Quote, since the president repeatedly in his public performance used the term moderate as a selling point of his policy in this operation, he is now trapped in a trap of his own device. Because the elements in Iran with whom we talked most of the time, Prime Minister Mousavi and his deputy or assistant, Kangarloo, are clearly the most extreme. But they are the elements in control, in whose hand it was to bring about the release of the hostages and to improve relationships in the short range. General Secord confirmed to us that the Prime Minister's assistant, the man called Kangarloo, was more than just a radical. He was one of the kidnappers.
We found through intelligence means that he was actually tied to the group that took new hostages even as we got one released. So, I mean, this was ridiculous. I mean, we were dealing with a true radical here.
There was no secret about where Secretary Shultz and Secretary Weinberger stood on this initiative. They were both appalled at the prospect of the U.S. providing Iran with anything except airdrop munitions that we were dropping on the Iranians. They thought that this was the most unholy activity that the U.S. could undertake.
But when you heard the objections of the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, did you
I never really heard them that clearly. And reason is that the machinery broke down. It never worked as it should. The key players with the experience weren't ever called together and to review the decisions that were made at a lower level.
There's no doubt in my mind that Vice President Bush knew exactly where each man stood. I'm quite sure that both men made some effort to lobby Vice President Bush to see this matter differently.
Why, to this very day, do you think George Bush still feels the need to maintain that veil?
The only explanation I have for the current situation is that the president changed his story. Some time ago, he sought to portray himself as out of the loop, uninformed, and unaware of the opposition of Secretary Shultz and Secretary Weinberger. Had he simply left well enough alone, I don't believe there would be any question today about his credibility on this matter.
I'll be back in a moment.
I noticed a definite difference in the way they drive.
The Goodyear AquaTread all-season radial. Its advanced deep groove aqua channel channels water away as you drive.
Just like you're glued to the road. 60,000 mile guarantee. Snow, wet, dry, strong, secure.
AquaTread, only from Goodyear.
Gives me a feeling of Aquaman.
Another reason we say the best tires in the world have Goodyear written all over them.
I'd go to Goodyear immediately. I really would.
My glasses are so heavy. Can Lens Crafters help?
You need Lens Crafters exclusive featherweights. Lighter, slimmer.
They're so light and so comfortable. I hardly know I've got them on.
Lens Crafters, better fit for greater comfort in about an hour.
Ace is a place for helpful hardware folks and Best Buys like these.
This Ace 24-inch poly lawn rake is only $3.99, and the 25-foot Ace tape rule is just $6.88.
Ace Best Buy.
Another reason Ace is the place.
For you.
A test drive, 6 miles on smooth roads. If I was only driving 6 miles on smooth roads, I'd buy a bike. I'd get in shape. Let me test drive in rush hour traffic, so I can see if it'll last like a Subaru. Let me test drive it to snowy Alaska, so I can see if it has all-wheel drive like a Legacy. Don't take me around the block. Let's get it to 50 and slam the brakes, so I can see if it offers anti-lock brakes like a Legacy. Test drives aren't real. What's real is the money I'm spending. Show me, tell me, I have the money. I want to know what to drive.
Listen to what people have to say about Progresso soups.
I eat this.
You do?
I do eat the minestrone.
Is there anything different on that label?
Low fat, no cholesterol, right here. And then it also says same great recipe. I think it's great. I mean, if it's always been like that, I think they should maybe say that a little more. It's close to the way my grandmother made it, to be quite honest. It's got the macaroni and the beans, and like I said before, all those good vegetables and pasta and all that stuff in there. We've always had it, and I've always eaten it, I've always liked it. Even though they're now advertising low fat, no cholesterol, it's always been that way. And I think that's fantastic.
Here, when you think about it, is what all the investigations and inquiries about Iran-Contra have concluded. President Reagan, the Tower Commission found, was not engaged. Sort of a polite way of saying he didn't know what was going on. Vice President Bush was, by his own account, not in the loop. He knew some of what was going on, but never enough to be responsible. Secretary of State Shultz opposed dealing with Iran for hostages, and so did Secretary of Defense Weinberger. So much for the four senior-most members of the Reagan-Bush administration. We are left to wonder, as we have been since the beginning of this sordid affair, how a handful of junior people was able to hijack such a significant portion of the U.S. government, or whether, perhaps, some of the senior people didn't know a little more than they've let on. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
If you wish a videocassette version of Nightline, the cost is $14.98 plus $3.95 shipping and handling.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
An anonymous tip.
Who is this?
6 brutal murders.
This is the biggest story of the year.
and a TV reporter who knows too much.
You just better be careful.
Suzanne Summers, exclusive Sun.
1988.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Then George Bush signed the second biggest tax increase in American history.
Read my lips.
George Bush increased taxes on the middle class. Bush doubled the beer tax and increased the gas tax by 56%. Now George Bush wants to give a $108,000 tax break to millionaires. $108,000. Guess who's going to pay? We can't afford 4 more years.
Which health plan should you choose for your family? Traditional or Greater Atlantic?
Well, compare the two. With traditional insurance, you get deductibles and surprise bills. With Greater Atlantic's Health Coverage Plus, you get 100% coverage for hospitals, surgery, doctor's visits, and preventive care. With traditional insurance, try getting preventive care. The choice is easy. Greater Atlantic.
Greater Atlantic. 100% coverage for 100% peace of mind. Ask your employer.
Since the Honda Accord is America's best-selling car, why would you want to lease one? Well, for one thing, you won't have to drop a lot of cash. Introducing the Accord Lease Program. See your nearest dealer for details.
The Pennsylvania Senatorial Debate, 12 noon Sunday on Channel 6. Welcome to the $1 Million Movie. Tonight's feature film is Fire with Fire, starring Virginia Madsen and Kate Reed.